Dragon Ball Daima has concluded, and this has left us with a lot of unanswered questions and has sparked a lot of debates and new debates to come over Dragon Ball Daima, where there's going to be power scaling, what is the connection to Dragon Ball Super, retcons, all type of different stuff that we have to just look at as a fandom. Ultimately, I'm just going to say this: my point of views, my thoughts, my opinions, all of this is my opinions, and there is no official confirmation of any of this from any of the official companies that work with Dragon Ball, like Toei, Shueisha, Toriyama, Akio, anyone that's there, Burst Studios, Capsule Corp, Tokyo, all these different companies. None of them has officially came out and stated anything about Dragon Ball Daima being connected to Dragon Ball Super. Now, there has been Easter eggs, like we got to see the Kais and different things, like mention of Universe 7. We got to hear all these different things that was put into Daima, which is just all part of the universe. Just because they mention these things doesn't mean that they're going to be connected to each other, as far as it's still the same timeline. Like, you can look at Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, you're still going to have Goku. Whether they're all still the same, that's a different story. Now, the thing I want to bring to your attention is that in Japan, and especially with Akira Toriyama, he never really cared about canon. And this is going to be explaining a lot of stuff about Dragon Ball Daima, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball in general, even when it comes down to Super and even Dragon Ball GT. And it's some things that you just got to look at. There's a reason why, and I'm going to start with Dragon Ball GT, because when it comes down to canon debate, we're going to come here and crush anything about canon. It's all canon, whether they're all in a different media property, or whether there are some different timeline. Like, it goes back to just movies, and like it's mentioned before, when you're talking canon, you're going to be asking canon to what? Because now at this point with Dragon Ball is that they want to keep a certain space where I would say New Age Dragon Ball after the movies. Before, we had a bunch of separate timelines with movies. There's certain movies that could actually fit into the timeline, but majority of the movies back then didn't really fit into the timeline, seeing that they happened coinciding with to wherever the arc that was going on at the time. But when we look back at things like the New Age Dragon Ball, where Battle of Gods, Resurrection of F, and Broly, these are all being connected to the timeline. But the thing is, even with the movies like Battle of Gods and Resurrection, they're still going to be separate technically when you trying to compare them to like Super, because at the end of the day, they redid these arcs to retell those movies. So there's some things that happen different from each other. Prime example, Resurrection of F. Those are Dragon Ball Z movies. Dragon Ball Super redid these in their show, and in their version, Captain Ginyu returns and is killed off. So technically, in the Dragon Ball Z world of things with Battle of Gods, Captain Ginyu is still alive in the original Toriyama's vision, whereas in Super is a little bit different. So there's a lot of things you just got to take into account when you're looking at this. Now, Super has went on to make its own timeline and events of things, which contradict things of Dragon Ball GT, which for many, many years, over the time that Dragon Ball GT was done before Battle of Gods came out, GT was looked at as the official canon and ending to the Dragon Ball franchise. And there is a certain respect level when you look at the Japanese culture that I think that they wouldn't want to go over what was done before, like Dragon Ball GT, which is the reason why a show like Super continues to stay contained inside Dragon Ball Z within those 10-year gap, and they don't want to go over what was done in Dragon Ball GT, even though they're doing things different in Dragon Ball Super, which goes against everything in Dragon Ball GT, because there's no Super Saiyan God or Super Saiyan Blue or UI or UE Vegeta, anything to that nature. No Beast Gohan. We don't have any of that in Dragon Ball GT, which of course we know the reason why, because GT came out first, before those things was even created. But in universe, they didn't care to make those things blend with each other, because at the end of the day, they wanted to create something new. And a lot of key points where we look at interviews from Akio, and he's talking about, Toriyama's perspective on certain things, even Toriyama explaining about why, you know, by being able to create characters like Goku being an alien, and a lot of the cast members are alien members like Goku, Vegeta, and Piccolo, and the villains. The thought process, they don't want them to connect to just regular humans and how we think. They're able to expand and do things different and create plots. And also, on top of this, there's a lot of things that was revealed that Toriyama felt like by Goku turning back into a kid, it kind of opened up the doors for new plots to be, he felt like he's kind of like writing himself in a corner with Goku being an adult in a sense. So really, a lot of times they're putting things in place to open doors, and they don't care about making separate timelines. They just want to tell a good story, which is why he considered, at the time, Dragon Ball GT a grand side story, because at the end of the day, they still respect Dragon Ball GT and they didn't want to go over it. So if anything will be a grand side story, it will kind of be Super, because Super is jumping into the middle of what's going on in Z. And until Super passes the end of Z, and even then they can pass the end of Z and still show what happened during the time Goku left with Oob to train, because we didn't get to see that. We just knew GT started 5 years after that, and we don't know what that training was like with Goku and Oob, and what happened with any events or anything like that happened during that time frame. So there's still a lot of open room for them to still have plot points for Super that still doesn't go over, Dragon Ball GT. And whether they decide to make it all fit in the end, that's all room for interpretation. But back to Dragon Ball Daima now. Dragon Ball Daima is the same thing. They created a plot point, but this time they wanted to make it in a space where it's not going over Super, even though they could have squeezed it in. But then again, I think how they're doing things, they're doing it for that reason, because at the end of the day, people got to realize this. They're making these separate timelines or separate things. They're not going over these plot points. Also out of respect level for certain things, but also they don't want to have running properties that's going to be interfering. Because if they put Dragon Ball Daima within the middle of Dragon Ball Super, it would technically just be a Super, show in a sense, if it's making sense. Same thing with Dragon Ball GT. Dragon Ball GT is 15 years after the fight with Buu. So that's portion is already taken for a story. They're probably not going to want to write anything to affect that, even though all these other things are happening different and they can rewrite everything after that and change. But then they're going to make people have to pick and choose of which one do we want to see of the ending. Do we want to see a Dragon Ball GT? So they're going to always leave these different rooms for interpretation. Whereas now Daima is happening before Super, but everything is still being contained within Dragon Ball Z with Daima and Super because of this point. Because at the end of the day, what they're doing with Daima is really more of an introduction back into the series. And like they said, they're not trying to bring anything new. They're just uncovering things that was already there in the story with Daima. So Daima is just more like a Easter egg type of, like, refreshing the memories of the fans and bringing new and old fans together. And that's what Daima was created for, to pretty much bridge that gap and have people go back to watch all of the old Dragon Ball properties like Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Super, even Dragon Ball Heroes. So at this point now with Daima may be its own separate timeline, but it's still early that they can still fit and make Daima squeeze in with Super. And they still got time to make explanation whether they come back with Daima with a season 2, which is a big possibility, because the whole point of them creating Dragon Ball Daima was because people wanted more Dragon Ball anime. And at the time, they didn't want to go forward with making more episodes for Dragon Ball Super because of the manga, probably giving time for it to catch up and not be in the same type of boat what happened with Dragon Ball Z. But the thing to this is that they still have a chance to have a separate property where people's going to get excited about a new show. So Super will be doing what Super do, and Daima will be doing what Daima does. So they can come back with a season 2, and that's why we probably have open plot thread that wasn't really solved in Daima right now, because they may come back with a Daima season 2, which go into elaborate about those extra third eyes, and that could be a thing where another villain or somebody gets a third eye and become powerful, and they have to try to stop him. But I don't think that will be the only thing for them to try to do, because they already know that they will have to hit the person in the head 3 times in the back of the head to remove the third eye. So that wouldn't be that much, of a big threat to them at this point now, because they'll be able to know how to remove that third eye. And especially the person that's probably getting the third eye probably won't even know that weakness either. So I don't think that will be something, but it could be still be a big possibility of everything. But we may get a season 2 of Daima, because they want to have more anime going on, and they could tell more stories and more things that probably wasn't revealed that Toriyama had in his notes working on, that they didn't get a chance to do, and they probably want to save that for a season 2 to have more, Dragon Ball out there for the next coming years. And of course, we're gonna probably get new movies and everything, but ultimately this is just to make everything a full series. And people talk about canon, we're gonna talk about the original Dragon Ball works, which is from Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z. If you want to talk about things from the manga, those are the original canon. Everything else is all just extra filler, if you want to call that, but at the end of the day, they don't look at canon the same way we look at canon, and to them things already been different, even when we're looking at anime to manga, especially in new age of Dragon Ball, where you have Super, where the anime came first before the manga. So at the end of the day, it's like people don't talk about the differences of those two, and which one would you consider as the canon. Of course, people say the anime because that was the one that came first and was the original work that was being adapted, and things was changed in the manga. But then again, it gets kind of weird because you have Toriyama involvement with both, and giving notes in certain things they changed, and some things are not his idea. So at the end of the day, it's really just no point of saying anything about canon and their connection. And Dragon Ball Daima probably might not be connected to Super, or it may. We don't really know at this point. We have small little hints and details, but at this point it may become its own property and its own story that they can do, where they don't have to worry about going over, or they probably don't even care about whether it makes sense to Super, because at the end of the day, this is Dragon Ball Daima and not Dragon Ball Super. So they're not going to really care if it doesn't make sense to that, because this is like its own thing. Even though it's taking place in the Dragon Ball world and it's its own thing, they're not going to care too much of that, even though they're not trying to go all the way over Super and stuff. But their story is telling its own, and it's taking place in a different part. But to them, that's how they look at it, that it doesn't have to really fully make sense. In a sense, it's a good way to look at back classic American cartoons, like Dexter Laboratory back then on Cartoon Network, and these shows, or Rugrats, where different episodes they would have different things happen. Go, like, I watch Dexter Laboratory or one of these other shows, and today they'll do something, and then the next day is like they're doing something totally different. And you kind of could look at that in an anime sense, where Daima doing something and then Super is doing his own thing, and at the end of the day, it's all Dragon Ball, and that's just how they look at it, and that's all they care about, and just making a good story for us to enjoy. So that's it for this video. I'm out. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Like I said, we got more videos, more explanations coming on, and I hope this video breaks it down a little bit about all this, canon and connections of Dragon Ball Daima and Dragon Ball Super and Dragon Ball GT, all these different shows, and give you a little bit more insight to that. So that's it for now. I'm out.